Good afternoon, also from Newcastle now, and welcome back. In this third lecture today, I would focus more on the metal tool blades in Egyptian text and iconography, which are more or less daily bread of Egyptologists. And I will also try to glean some of the strands of evidence or pieces of evidence that might be relevant then to the study of material culture. And what follows will be a chronological overview of a selection of textual and iconographic sources. I cannot cover every bit and piece of that. I will be focusing on the Old Kingdom earliest era with ample evidence for tools, especially because I dedicated already a book for this, and I studied closely also iconographic sources. And yeah, as I said, focuses on information that can have direct bearing on the study of artifacts for archaeologists. But I hope I will also make some points that are relevant for my Egyptological colleagues. And we will start again. I already mentioned in previous talk the tomb of Hesira from North Saqqara. And here are the earliest depicted tools, very probably in wooden boxes. There are painted three boxes with some tools, which we can see in this rendering published by James Kibel. Next to it are two boxes with weighing stones. And what is intriguing, there are also these gaming boards. So something that you can spend your leisure time with. And this will be relevant later because we have some early Egyptian evidence for why maybe gaming boards are also connected somehow to the tools. And from the same publication, here is a detail, and you can see that the artist who was painting these were on stucco on mud brick walls, these paintings, and here you can see rendering of wooden hafts and handles, and the rendering of the blades you can see X blade, saw blade, different chisel blades, and also maybe some other things. Unfortunately, we also have to, because this is a rendering of ancient Egyptian evidence, we also have to count with the possibility that the person who was doing the copy did not understand all the details that were present there in the iconographic source. And the rendering might not have been precise. And it's a thing that is really relevant for some of the documentation of the iconographic sources. Again, I mentioned Anhua. You will see that I will be often mentioning the same pieces of evidence because we don't have that many of those, especially for the early parts of Egyptian history. As I said, this is the rendering of the edge blade in 3D. It's possibly the earliest rendering of the edge blade, and this is maybe globally the earliest statue of metalworker in the world, of the guy named Anhua, who was also shipwright of Sema ships, and this is probably a symbol of his status and of his office or artisanal practice as a shipwright, although these Sema ships, of course, have also some religious connotations. And the statue can be dated to the Third Dynasty because it's so-called pre-canonical statue. It does not resemble the canonical phase starting somewhere in the Fourth Dynasty. There are other examples, unfortunately not with the craft tools of such pre-canonical statues. And it's clearly an ad. What is also important to mention, there are some indications of craftswomen and sources from the Third Dynasty. High official Chabau Sokar, one of the biggest tombs in North Saqqara alongside Hezires, was the tomb of Chabau Sokar, and he was a controller, or in ancient Egyptian Khereb, of the craftswomen working with precious stones and ivory. And arguably already then and there, these must have been using also tools with metal blades, most probably made of arsenical copper in that period. And this tomb was published by Margaret Murray. And here's the title for the workers with precious stones, female workers with precious stones. The determinative is clear. These are females. And again, determinative for ivory here, and another title belonging to a male figure, a male official, highly positioned official, Habal Sokar. But here we can see in the written text evidence of craftswomen. Recently, I think 23 was published this PhD thesis of Michelle Hampson from Macquarie University, Make It According to the Plan, workshop scenes in Egyptian tombs of the Old Kingdom. And she very successfully collected many pieces of evidence, and she is discussing in much detail also the captions of the scenes, all the texts that are accompanying all this evidence. And you can again see from an iconographic source, there is a craftsman who has an adze over his shoulder, and they are both putting a lid on a sarcophagus, which might be made either from wood or from stone. And some time ago, I have also studied this topic. In this book, I tried to propose a vocabulary and typology of tools from the 4th until the 6th dynasty. And I have tried to use iconographic and textual sources for establishing secure definitions of the tool names, because there are some ongoing discussions about the identifications of the objects on the reliefs. And as I said, some of the early artists who were copying the iconographic sources did not necessarily understand all the details and all the details of the tools, and we now can see them with this knowledge, and we can identify precisely and properly the tools that are depicted, or the tool blades. Old Kingdom is the earliest era with ample evidence for tools. In that book, this was defined as period covering dynasties from the 4th until the end of 6th. Although previous century of the 3rd dynasty can be added too, it depends. Some of the authors include early dynastic, some of the authors include 3rd dynasty into the early dynastic period. Other authors include 3rd dynasty into the Old Kingdom. For me, it was easier to define this as 4th to 6th dynasty, basically from Meidum to Saqqara as the main sites. And I have tried to propose this definition, a semiotic triangle combining the tool name, the full-size tool, and the model tool or the tool representation in order to identify the adzes. For example, in the written sources, here is the name of an adze in ancient Egyptian, which is Anet. In the full-size tools, which are found in these contexts, and model representation, so model tools rendered, for example, in the burial equipment, but also sometimes these are depicted in this aspective of ancient Egyptian art, where the edge is depicted from the front, and the half is depicted from the side, but you can identify the tool that is depicted there exactly because of this approach of ancient Egyptian artists. And the earliest, after Hezira, the earliest so-called seeing scene of tool use is from Meidum, from this tomb, and it was published by Petrie. And this is, in Hezira, we had tools only in the box, but here we have them in the action and observed by an official. And what is important here is this Egyptian verb that is denoting seeing, and tomb owner oversees the work that is done on behalf of him or her by the artisans in this life and in this afterlife. And this is very humble beginning of something that will blow up to much bigger proportions later on in the Old Kingdom. But it's something that was important for, let's say, the highest members of the elite, because you can afford the decorated tomb, decorated also with craft scenes, only if you are quite rich, even in Old Kingdom Egypt. So for the highest members of elite, this was important to have the depictions of the crafts active and craftsmen active on their behalf in this life or in the afterlife. And there's another aspect which is maybe connected also to this collocation of the gaming boards in the tomb of Hesira, because in some Old Kingdom sources, I have selected only one example. We have definition of craft activity as something that is worth watching. And I quote from this false door, which is now in Boston and was found in Giza, made in the presence of the king himself at the portal of the audience hall, while his majesty watched every day there. This is an inscription on these false doors of the singer Hufuan, who was buried at Giza. And now this false door is on display in Boston. And it's, if you have been in Boston, it's huge. It's almost 3 meters high object, weighing more than 7 tons. It's more than 7 tons of white limestone. So this is clearly something that was admired already in the 5th dynasty when these false doors were made. But we have conferred written evidence on this false door that this was even watched by the king himself, and he was interested in this craft process. And we have other pieces of evidence, other texts from the Old Kingdom that really define craft activities as something that is worth watching and is connected to this aspect of Ma'a scenes. In late 6th dynasty, these very humble craft scenes developed to these huge tableau. This is an example from Middle Egypt, from Del Argebrawi, tomb of Ibi, where you have multiple registers and basically a lot of people active in various different craft activities. There are sculptors, there are carpenters or furniture makers, there are stone producers. Here we have, again, furniture makers, some jewelry producers, there's a sculptor there, metal workers. Here is probably bead production with drills. Here is balance or a scale where they are weighing copper. It's written here in the caption. Then we have shipwrights who are producing the vessels, and some of these are transporting a wooden log. We have more wood processing and scribes who are at the boxes and probably making a list of the produced objects. And then there is unconnected motif of a fowl, which is also belonging to the tomb owner. And again, this whole text begins with the word or verb ma'a, seeing, and it's a description of this particular official who is observing this craft activity done on his behalf. And these craft scenes in the Old Kingdom range from careful compositions where American team was able to document the original network of the guidelines for the craftsmen, where they cut out this scene and this tomb. If you're lucky, you can visit it also in Giza today, and you can see these various tools in action in these craft scenes. So from these careful compositions, it ranges to something that we can call sketches, where you can see here a metal worker working with his crucible. Here is clearly a carpenter who is working with a piece of wood and having an adze used in his right hand. Here we have another carpenter working with wood with an axe. And this is probably a rendering of how sometimes Egyptian artists, even in the Old Kingdom, could have been able to sketch craft action and maybe make some notation, although this particular painting is located down below in the burial chamber, so very likely this particular craftsman was not observing actual craftsmen, but he was working from the memory, and he was very quickly painting the sketch of the craft activity. But if you can read Old Kingdom art, you can read what he was meaning to depict in this particular composition. In some other iconographic evidence, we have even depicted objects that are produced in the metalworking workshop. So I already mentioned this tomb from Sheikh Said, where very nicely are depicted vessels. There is also a mirror disc. There is wash basin and spouted jar, maybe another vessel. And below it, you have an X blade. This is possibly an edge blade. This is saw blade, and this is either rendering of a crucible or it's denotation of the material. So it could have been read via copper in the Old Kingdom. Or it might be determinative of this word. It's hard to tell. But we can presume that all the objects, tools, vessels, mirrors, but also possibly some Old Kingdom battle axes were produced in the same workshops from the same material. And the main tool types, this is an example, maybe the most beautiful iconographic source that there is from the Old Kingdom, Tomb of Tea in Saqqara, which you can of course regularly visit because it's open for tourists, and there is really an embarrassment of riches of the captions here of either depiction, either denoting the craft action that is done, or direct speech quotes of these craftsmen that are active. And for an updated discussion of these captions, I would refer to Michel Hampson's book that I mentioned in the beginning. As for the vocabulary of the Old Kingdom tools, X is clear. It's called meatbed or minbed. Then we have two types of edzes called anet and mesechtiu. Several types of chisels. The most frequent is menech, but there is also jamet chisel, sat chisel, and gewa chisel. These are 4 offering lists from the Old Kingdom and Early Dynastic period, from the 3rd dynasty, from Wapnum, that preserved names of these tools. So it's something, a different phenomenon or a different rendering of the phenomenon that we have in the Tomb of Hesira, where we have these boxes with tools. Here we have an actual list written in hieroglyphs with the names of tools, and the determinatives are most of the times clear, so we can identify those tools. And we have also 2 types of saw blades. The most frequent one is tefa, and the rare one is heria, which also appears later on in the sources. To this list that was published in my book in 2016 can be now added also stoneworking big chisel how, because this is now rendered in the Wadi al-Jarf papyri from the 4th dynasty. So we have also this word that we know from New Kingdom sources is now also known from the Old Kingdom. And we have some chisels here in action. This is a scene from the tomb of Pepin the Black in Middle Egyptian Mer. And here you can see in the detail how one of the craftsmen is using chisel in one hand and mallet in the other. So he is propelling the chisel, which is very likely, which has a very likely wooden handle, and he's shaping the statue. On the other side of the statue is another sculptor who is using chisel in both of his hands, and he does not have any mallet, and he is using it maybe more, let's say, freehand. And chisels and techniques of working with chisels will be in more detail discussed tomorrow within the contribution by Melanie Pitkin, where we did some experiments with the replicas of ancient Egyptian chisels. So I will leave this for now. In the iconographic sources, there are some drills. So this is from the tomb of Ebi, this painting of probably of the production of beads, where there is this drill that is drilling here, powered by 2 hands. And then we have also evidence from the tomb of Tea of the bow drill, where you have a drill held in one hand and drilling a hole in this wooden box, very probably wooden box, and in the other hand is held a bow, which is propelling the drill. And this is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, rendering of the bow drill. And of course, in the New Kingdom, we have much better evidence for this and rendered in more detail. Maybe in this case, the bow was indicated by painting, because not in all parts of Tomb of Tea the polychromy is preserved. Edzes are quite interesting because they are also represented in, for example, in religious sources in the pyramid texts. And here it is one of the examples of the tradition that can be already traced to the statue of Anhua, where you have this resting position of an edzha and edz over the shoulder, which is probably, again, a symbol, a status symbol of shipwrights or carpenters or persons who are working with edzes. And this is a typical trait that is depicted for several persons throughout the Old Kingdom. Here also for the tomb of Idut. Then we have in the iconographic sources also some unusual use of edge blades. So this is from Zawiyat el-Meitin from late 5th dynasty tomb of Hunes, where you can see how the edge blade is shaping the bow, probably the bows. And here we have some long wooden hafts. And here's something that I interpreted in my recent book as producing spearheads, but then I realized that on the continuation of the scenes, there is a large depiction of the boats. So these are very probably the oars for the boats, and there are other examples of the production of the oars. So very likely my interpretation of this as production of spearheads was not correct. But for the weaponry, there still remains the bow, although this is a very old reproduction from the 19th century, and unfortunately the scene is not preserved. So we don't know for real what was there on the relief and what was. We have only the rendering that is here in the publication by Lepsius. Maybe in the original documentation the copy will be better than this what was published, but I did not have yet a chance to check this one. In the original documentation, which is stored in Berlin. There is this beautiful market scene in the tomb of Nianchhnum and Chnumhotep in Saqqara, where we have a lot of economic transactions going on in the 5th dynasty Old Kingdom Egypt. And we will focus only on this small detail where we have a craftsman who is clearly denoted by the hieroglyph as a metal worker, Bejati, as is my proposed reading of this title. And he's holding in one hand fish hooks, and in the other hand something that we already established. It's an edge blade, and he is very likely trying to exchange those objects for some other stuff. And it's depicted very nicely in this market scene. Also in the tomb of Kaimrehu, the block is right now exhibited in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, in the old museum on the Tahrir Square. And there you can see very clearly that on the one scale pen where scale bow are weighing stones, on the other are something that are very clearly multiple edge blades. And this was first published by Maria Mogensen in 1921, and this detail was not rendered correctly. When I have seen the block in the Egyptian Museum Cairo, I was, or my colleague, draughtswoman Marketa Kobierska, she was working from this photograph, and she rendered clearly that these are edge blades, and as we established, they can be identified as edge blades based on the ancient Egyptian evidence. And this motif was then used also on the cover of my third book. We have also some egg blades, and there are some funny motifs of lumberjacks working and felling some trees and working then on the wooden logs, while there are some goats and maybe some other species eating the foliage on some other trees. And this is again from Zawiya Dalmatin from Middle Egypt. Rendering of the big axes that would have been used to fell trees. And another example from Saqqara, from the Chapel of Kahai and his family, where we have craftsmen active and using axe blades, again, to fell trees with both hands, while for the finer work, they are using mostly adzes, but we can also see in the middle an artisan who is, or lumberjack who is also using an axe to smooth down this wooden log that was fell down. And below we have a rendering of the furniture making and making of some, well, here's a sarcophagus, very likely made of wood, a bed, a door frame, and a column. And on the very far left side is sewing wooden plank. And there are also saws. As I told you, they are called tefa in ancient Egyptian evidence. And there are, for example, bigger saws, which one of the artisans is holding by both hands the haft or handle of it, and he's sewing the plank in downward motion, and the other one is holding together this sewn log, which is also counterweighted here. While we have also some smaller saw blades or saws used, as in this example from the Chapel of Kahai and his family, where here an important point to make is, of course, that this is not a technical drawing. So we don't know whether this particular artist was rather not trying to enlarge the saw blade for the effect, so that it's better visible and it's really well represented. And while in fact he was thinking of something much smaller, if only one person is able to operate the saw blade. It's very important to compare the iconographic evidence with the actual artifacts. Unfortunately, for the saw blades, we have very little of them. And in the next lecture, I will show you how little we have of the Old Kingdom saw blades. There is a question of ownership, because the artifacts themselves, of course, can also bear text. And some of these are referring to the so-called philae designations, which are working units in Old Kingdom building projects, and they refer to different kings. For example, this that's in the middle is referring to the King Snofru. This on the right side is referring to the King Userkara, and they all are referring to these philae or working units. So it looks like these are state-owned tools which are issued for particular craftsmen, and maybe after some time they are again returned to the state property because they belong, based on the inscription, they belong to the state. And this is the interpretation that was already proposed in the literature, and I can see no problem with it. But there are problems with some other inscriptions, and this is this is a different example, which is now in Museum August Kestner in Hanover. This is an axe blade which has only the inscription of the personal name EP, and there is no title, there is no reference to the philae. And I have tried in my recent book to propose the interpretation that maybe these refer to the ownership of the particular craftsman. There is no need for this craftsman to write his title or to write the reference to the philae, because this is his personal property and he's denoting it by his name, and there is no necessity of writing besides the name any other information. This is of course a proposition, and well, I tried as much data as possible, and there are some tool blades which really have only these personal names without any other information. And for me, the simplest and the most logical interpretation uh, is this one, that this is very likely a reference to personal property of that particular craftsman, and he's inscribing that tool with his own name. In the first intermediate period and Middle Kingdom, we have increase in the three-dimensional wooden model workshops, and when it was more dangerous to build, or it was almost impossible to build large tombs with huge panels of decoration, either rendered in relief or in painting. So it was preferred to do these three-dimensional model workshops. And then in the Middle Kingdom, the tradition of the three-dimensional workshops continues, but there are also, again, paintings. Most important craft scenes are from the Middle Egyptian side of Beni Hassan. Here as an example, this is a workshop which is now in Copenhagen, and it was found at Saqqara in the tomb of Gemniemhat, where we have in different rooms. Here we have carpentry, there is also metallurgy, and there is pottery making depicted in front of these rooms. And it's also interesting to note that these rooms are half covered and half covered by roof and half open. But we don't know whether this is a rendering of the particular and practical situation of these workshops, or the artist basically tried to show you what is happening in the workshop with the figurines. And here we have metal workers working at a crucible, and here is at the side is a toolbox, and here you can see various tools which have also, of course, wooden handles and hafts, and they have also metal blades. And here is a detail, and you can see that clearly some of these chisels are bigger, some are smaller, so there is some scaling in the size, as well as in the case of the X blades. And this observation will be more important in the next lecture about the actual archaeological specimens of these tools. Here is another nice example from Saqqara, from the tomb of Wesermut and Impuemhat, a man and a woman, where we have again rendering of a workshop with some active craftsmen, and here we have a nice toolbox where actually all the tools fit in that toolbox, and we have a scribal palette, and we have different chisels, X blade, but also a drill and an angle as well. So objects that would have been made in the workshop of wood, and there would have not been any metal part for these. But for the craftsman that was producing this model workshop, this was also important to render. Of course, if the wood is gone, we don't know what is missing from this model equipment. In the first intermediate period and Middle Kingdom, there are also renderings of the toolkit on the coffins. Here is an example from Abu Sir from the first intermediate period, from the tomb of Herishef-Hotep, from his coffin, which is now in Leipzig in Germany, where you have two saws, edge blades, chisels, and also a rendering of the bow drills and two X blades as well, with indicated thongs, leather thongs that would fasten the blade to the wooden haft. There are also some very nice examples of the weighing of tool blades, and the nicest one is here on the letter C from Tomb of Amenemhat at Beni Hassan, where you have this very nice rendering on the balance of a mirror disc and some other tool blades. And on the other balance bowl or balance pen, you have an edge blade as well, and an X blade, possibly a chisel. And there is again a question whether this is, let's say, technical drawing, or this is rather an attempt of a craftsman depicting all possible options of what could have been weighed on these larger standing scales, different types of tools here. We simply don't know, and we cannot ask the particular painter what he has meant by this motif, but it's really nice iconographic evidence for the weighing of the tool blades. Sometimes on the coffins, artisan tools are depicted with other objects with metal parts. So here we have on the right side, we have a toolkit, but also some weapons. There are two dagger blades. This is possible a mirror case with a nice handle, and some spearheads and some razors and cases. So here in one scene painted, we have a rendering of all the objects that would have been produced in metal workshops, and they would be considered one category of material culture by Middle Kingdom Egyptians. Here's an example of the use of artisan tools in the workshop setting in a tomb painting from Beni Hassan from the tomb of Khnumhotep II. You can see basically the same tools as we have seen in the Old Kingdom iconographic evidence. So we have a saw blade, we have an edge blade, there is a product, there is a bed with lion head here next to this craftsman. There are also some lumberjacks with axe blades, and there are shipwrights who are producing a vessel out of wood. And what is interesting to note, this is again, it's an example of ma'asing. We have again here this work of ma'a, of seeing, of the nomarch Khnumhotep, who is seeing those craftsmen and watching them at work. But what is interesting, we didn't have in the Old Kingdom sources, we did not have armed guards. But here we have a personal bodyguard of this nomarch Khnumhotep with a shield and also with a battle axe in one of the hands. If you know of any Old Kingdom example of this, please let me know. But I think this is one of the slight differences between the Old and Middle Kingdoms as regarding the craft scenes. And here you can compare, here are the tools as well. And we have, as is the similar case in the three-dimensional renderings of the workshops, we have a toolbox with some tools indicated, which are put inside of the toolbox. There are also some renderings of the artisan toolkits with numerals, which are very probably denoting weight. And this is an example from Bel Bersha, again from Middle Egypt, from the coffin of Sen, which is now in the British Museum, where there are numerals. So for example, you can see that the saw blade is indicated to have 40 units, very probably 40 of these copper deben that we were mentioning in the previous lecture. Fortunately, we have also preserved textual evidence from the copper working workshop. It's named Papyrus Reisner #2. And here in my book, I have tried to collect the evidence for the different weight of the different tool types. And the weight is in deben, and there are, for example, 19 mentions in those records from the metalworking workshops of X, which was weighing about 50 deben, which counted to this copper deben could have been about 1.5 kilogram of metal. And there are some specimens. There are some specimens of similar weight in the museum collections, and I tried to find some comparable examples. What is important to say, especially for the archaeologists in the audience, in these records, there is no detailed typology of the tool types. They are only named as an X, as an edge, as a chisel, or different names for chisels, yes. But there is this general category of one tool type, and then there is weight, and there are no finer typologies, something that we are spending several decades or centuries now producing these very detailed typologies of the Bronze Age metalwork. In the actual documents from the Bronze Age, there is only this general category identified, maybe some particular name for a chisel and the weight. These are only two main information that are present in these sources. We have also some evidence for the vocabulary of metalwork, where from the spell 816 of the coffin text, where this particular spell is about an adze used in ritual setting in the opening of the mouth. And in the text is written that the metal is washed. So this is very probably a reference to annealing, and then it is sharpened and strong. And particular words are used in this context, and these are these adjectives. Sepet, to be sharp, to make sharp, which was also used as a metaphor for being sharp, skilled, or be effective, to be skilled. So based on this evidence, the expression making a point or to make a point can be dated already to the Middle Bronze Age within ancient Egyptian. There is also this word nechet, to be strong, to strengthen, and also metaphorically to be able or strong, victorious. Of course, these words are used in a number of examples, not only in connection to the metalwork in the text. And then there is this word which is not used in this particular text, but is used for these chisels, but it also is used for describing craftwork, menech, to be splendid, to make splendid, to be effective. Very, very early on in the Old Kingdom sources, this is this use of adjective, but it's also at the same time a type of chisel. And very probably these two phenomena are connected, and they are maybe also connected to the craftwork as something that is worth watching and observing. In the New Kingdom, there are preserved very complex craft scenes. Activities are located in temple workshops. This is the main difference. In the Old Kingdom and in the Middle Kingdom, the workshop setting is clearly in the household of that particular person, or in the case of king, in the mortuary temples. This were very likely royal workshops, and of course, kings had depicted craft scenes as well. There are added some new crafts like glassmaking and production of war chariots, which are not represented either in the Old or the Middle Kingdoms, but the range of the artisan tools is the same as before. Although in this era they would have all been made of thin bronze. And this is an example from the tomb of Nebamun and Ipuki, where you can see here probably a rendering in the second register on the right side. This is probably rendering of the glass making, but otherwise, again, you can see the types of tools that we have already seen in the Old and Middle Kingdoms. But here, again, major difference is in the last register is the use of pot bellows, and maybe above is rendering of one or multiple oxhide ingots that are used for the production of metal. This is a famous tomb of Rechmira at Thebes, which is very often used for the examples of the use of tools. And again, the tool types that are here are very similar to the Old and Middle Kingdoms, but neither in the Old or Middle Kingdom we have this motif of the weighing of these golden rings. And what is here in this bowl on the ground are actually weighing stones, which were made of into the shapes of some animals. So, for example, bowheads, or we can see a lion or hippo here. And this is a rendering of a weighing stone, and you can see one of these weighing stones, a bovine head, also on the balance here on the left side. This is an innovation, a novelty. Tools are used in chariot production, but these are tools that we would meet already in the Old Kingdom. So, for example, adzes or some other, maybe some cutters, a knife here, or a small chisel here. And this is work with a leather, but here we have an adze, which is probably a shaping of a wooden wheel for the chariots. And as an example of the Ramesside tombs, here is tomb of Ipui from Deir el Medina. where again, this is production of a catafalque, and here you can see tools that we have met already in the tomb of Hesira. So we have chisels, we have also mallets, and maybe some some grounding stone tool, and there is a basket. In this case, this is a basket. This is not a toolbox, where we have stored tools, so a saw blade, a chisel blade, and some others which are put in one basket that all these craftsmen are using. There are also textual data for the metal operations, and one of the recent sources is so-called Notebook of Dutmose from the late 20th dynasty, where out of furniture and scrap metal are made vessels, tools, and weapons alike. Tin is added, but the tin is very likely added because most of the analyzed objects are made of tin bronze, but it's mentioned in this particular notebook only once. And as you can see within this table, for example, in this example, from a door which provided 31 deben of copper, there was made a chisel weighing 1 deben, and also a spare or spearhead which was weighing 1 deben, and the other material was probably used for some other purpose. But you can see how, well, basically anything goes, and altars and doors are recycled into tools and weapons and vessels as well, because for example, in the first line, we have production of spouted jar, wash basin, and the pole end weighing 4 deben. To conclude, nowhere else in the Bronze Age world is such a detailed iconography of the tool use in 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional rendering. But of course, it's an artistic representation of the tool use. And for the actual traces of the production and use where we have to study the artifacts, and they will be the subject of the next lecture after the break. And please, if you have any questions, write them down into the chat or use the video.